The PS5 has been out long enough now that there are quite a few different Pro Controller options that have been made specifically for it, and there are 4 different ones that I've got my hands on, tried out, made full videos on, and now I want to have all those 4 controllers go head to head. These include the official first-party DualSense Edge, the SCUF Reflex, the Razer Wolverine V2 Pro, and most recently that I've covered, the Victrix Pro BFG. We're going to look at what features all of these controllers have in common and what each of them does a little bit differently about them, what things each controller does uniquely, their varying price points, what I think makes each one a best fit for you potentially, and ultimately which ones I find myself personally reaching for the most. Before we get into some specific features, one distinction I do want to make about these Pro controllers right away is that you can kind of broadly narrow them down into 2 different camps. One, that are controllers that still maintain a lot of the features that the regular DualSense offers. The DualSense Edge is able to do this because it's the first party option designed to do that in the first place, and the SCUF Reflex is also an option that may get rid of some features but still keeps a lot of them intact due to the fact that it is effectively a modded PS5 DualSense. Meanwhile, the Razer Wolverine V2 Pro and the Victrix Pro BFG, while both officially licensed controllers, are built from the ground up brand new options that end up not offering some things that are core to the DualSense. They do not have adaptive triggers, they do not have advanced haptics, not even any form of rumble actually to begin with, no built-in speaker, they require a USB adapter to plug into the system, and neither of them are capable of turning the system on with a press of a button. You gotta make sure the system's turned on first. The Wolverine does still have gyro, though the Victrix does not. Now I know that sounds like a lot of features missing from those later 2 controllers, but I think a very important thing to emphasize is, again, when it comes to Pro controllers, oftentimes the goal is something that is designed specifically for competitive play and use in mind, and is not necessarily something that you're going to use as your catch-all controller for all day, everyday gaming. If you want something that is going to work across your entire library of games, both for single-player immersive experiences and competitive ones, the DualSense Edge and the SCUF Reflex are going to be ones you want to look a little more at. If, on the other hand, you don't mind sticking with the stock DualSense your system comes with as a way to experience and play single-player focused games, and then switch over to a Pro controller for when the situation actually calls for it, well then the Wolverine V2 Pro and the Victrix Pro BFG start to make some more sense. Now in terms of special features shared across all these controllers but may have some light differences, they all feature remappable back buttons in some form, they all have swappable stick heads, some with more options than others, they all have alternative trigger modes in some form, and they all offer some additional software customization to some extent, although how they achieve this is through a very large variety of different means. I want to start with back buttons, because this is really one of the features that I think is one of the most recognizable immediately about what makes something a Pro controller, and all of them actually have very interesting different ways of handling it, and I'm going to actually do this in the order of number of back buttons each one has. Starting with the DualSense Edge, which only has 2. Now to be completely, perfectly honest, 2 is all I ever really need when it comes to remappable back buttons personally. I am sure there are people out there that need more than that, but 2 has really been, in the vast majority of cases, how many I need. What is interesting about the DualSense Edge's approach to this, though, is that it actually has 2 different styles of back buttons. One is a half little nub, the other one being a more traditional shaped paddle, and these can be removed and swapped out based on your personal preference. This allows you to figure out which of these methods maybe feels a little bit more comfortable to you, which one might be a little easier to not accidentally press when you don't want to, or maybe you want one that's more easily within reach. I really love that it gives you those 2 additional options. Following up with that is the SCUF Reflex. Now again, this is effectively a modified PS5 DualSense, and in the case of its back buttons, it's actually making use of a set of 4 back paddles that can be removed when you want to. Personally, I do find the mechanism for this to be a little awkward to do. I don't really like removing and putting back in the paddles for these, so I generally leave them in. What is interesting about their shaping and design, though, is that your finger's meant to actually rest at kind of a midpoint between the 2 separate set of buttons, so there are an inner set that you click by pushing your fingers in, and then an outer set that you click by just pressing down like you normally would with back buttons, which is a setup I think is really nice and gives a good balance of somewhere for your finger to rest, but have easy access to 2 buttons simultaneously. The Victrix Pro BFG is another option offering 4 buttons total, though the setup is a little bit different. Instead of being all 4 side by side like on the SCUF Reflex, this is a set where you have 2 higher, 2 lower. I find they're placed in a way that is pretty comfortable for your fingers to rest on them, and the amount of pressure necessary to press them has made it so that I've never really accidentally misclicked them. It has come up a little bit more than some of the other options on here, but really just during my initial getting used to it phase, and over time did not become an issue. And then there's the Razer Wolverine V2 Pro, which comes with a staggering number of 6 remappable buttons, 4 of which are located on the back of the controller, and 2 more that are located on the top middle between the shoulder buttons. And I think an important difference to note about how the Wolverine V2 Pro approaches these buttons versus all the other ones is that they're placed in a way that you're not really meant to be constantly resting your finger on them. You can, but that does feel a little unnatural. You're really meant to more hold the controller like you would naturally, and then just reach a little bit out of your way to press the one that you need to. And so the intent here is that because your fingers aren't constantly resting on or near the buttons, there's not going to be any chance of accidentally clicking them, and you're only going to be intentionally pressing them when you go to do so. Now, as far as swappable stick heads go, most of these controllers are actually pretty similar in terms of the options they have to offer. The Scuff Reflex is the most different one, which we'll save for last. But the Victrix and Razer controllers both come with the same set of sticks where you have 2 regular concave shaped with 1 dome shape and 1 tall neck, while the DualSense Edge comes with a full set of 6 sticks, 2 that are standard concave, 2 that are domed, and 2 that are taller domed. When it comes to this approach though, I will say that out of the 3 controllers that share the same layout, my absolute favorite is the Wolverine V2 Pro, and that has to do with the method of swapping these. Both the DualSense Edge and Victrix BFG Pro rely on a physical system where you can feel yourself rip the stick off and shove it back into place because there's a physical tab holding it into place, and this is just not something I really care for in terms of long-term durability, whereas the Razer Wolverine V2 Pro features a magnetic system where they just simply magnetically pull into place and feel nice and secure, and generally I think it's just a better system for being able to swiftly swap stick heads. The Scuff Reflex is a little bit different because since this is a controller that is technically made to order, what stick heads you get is a little more up to you and how much you're willing to spend. You're able to choose between both dome and concave heads, as well as getting both tall and short neck in whatever form you want. And the mechanism for swapping it is actually removing the cover grill of the DualSense controller and just taking the entire stick part off and putting it back on. So it's still a physical system like the other ones, but it doesn't rely on physical tabs that you feel snap into place. It's just the tension of putting the full piece of plastic on top of the stick module itself. While we're on the subject of sticks, one additional point I want to bring out really quick is that currently a major talking point we're seeing in a lot of controller talk is the worrying of having developing stick drift and wanting to see more controllers embrace Hall effect sensors. None of these controllers on this list make use of Hall effect just yet. However, the DualSense Edge does have the interesting option of being the one controller that allows you to, on a user-friendly level at least, completely remove and replace the stick module. In fact, Sony sells these modules on their own, and the carrying case for the controller even comes with a place to store one away. So if you're worried about stick drift, none of these controllers offer Hall effect sensors, but the DualSense Edge does at least give you a way to easily swap a fresh new module in if that's an issue that begins to crop up. Next up, adjustable triggers, which is actually very different for all 4 controllers. The DualSense Edge has what is probably, I think, the most standard approach to this, where you just have a simple toggle to swap between 3 different trigger pull lengths. There's full pull, half pull, and short stop. The Victrix Pro BFG offers a similar function to this, where you can actually have a total of 5 different stops, offering the most variety of trigger pull lengths out of all the controllers. However, the mechanism for it is, in my opinion, probably the most awkward out of all these controllers, because instead of being a toggle that you switch between the different modes, you actually have to slide a holding mechanism into place, pull the trigger however far you want it to stop, and then release the mechanism to then have it be set at that mode. It's a thing that works, but if you ever need to quickly swap between different trigger pull styles, it just feels kind of awkward, and at the end of the day, I think it's just the least efficient method out of this list of controllers. The Scuff Reflex is another slightly awkward situation in this because you actually don't have the ability to swap between different modes once you've ordered the controller. Instead, when ordering a Scuff Reflex, you have the choice between picking either their instant click triggers or by keeping the more traditional adaptive triggers in the DualSense. If you want full pull triggers and you like the adaptive trigger feature that DualSense have, you can maintain that in the Scuff Reflex if you want, or you can pay extra for their instant click version that has a mouse-like tactile click that is very satisfying and is actually, I think, one of my favorite short form click options for the DualSense controller. It's just that once you order it that way, it is fixed in that mode. There is no way to swap between them, sadly. Meanwhile, the Razer Wolverine V2 Pro also offers that kind of 2-option system, but it is one you can swap between, where you can either have a more traditional full pull trigger or a short stop that actually feels like a tactile button. Compared to the Scuff Reflex, it is a little bit different. There's a tiny bit of travel distance before you actually get to the clicky part of pressing it down. I will say between the two, I think I like the feeling of the Reflex's click a little more, but as far as a controller that is able to do both the click and a full pull option that I can choose based on the game I'm playing, whether that's a racing game where I want full pull or a shooter or fighting game where I want it to just be a button, the Wolverine is able to do both of those in one controller. Now, as for software customization, each of these controllers comes with some form of additional customization that you can do making use of an additional app. As far as just the clear winner here goes, I just have to immediately say the DualSense Edge wins when it comes to an integration level of its software because it's the first party option. It just makes sense. In the case of both the Victrix and Razer controllers, these are additional apps that you have to make use of on other devices. Victrix, it's a PC app you have to hook your controller up to in order to access things like trigger sensitivity and remapping. Razer, it's a mobile app, so you can do it right then and there on your phone, which is a little bit more convenient, but still a bit of an awkward process. And Scuf technically doesn't actually offer any kind of software level customization, except for the fact that it's a modded DualSense controller. So all the things you can normally do on a PS5 with a DualSense, you're able to do on the Scuf Reflex as well. Meanwhile, the DualSense Edge has full-blown software customization baked right into your PS5 itself. You're able to view what profile you're in just by the touch of a button. You can quickly swap between profiles, and you'll actually have an on-screen notification of what profile you've just swapped to, and you can even immediately jump out of whatever game you're in and go right into the DualSense Edge's customization options to make any adjustments that you want to. And I do want to mention real quick too that not only does the DualSense Edge have, I think, the most convenient software options because it is, again, baked in the system, but I really love the way the app itself is actually set up. Both the Razer and Victrix ones are very functional focused and are just like, hey, here's the options, here's the things you can do, figure out what you want to do with it. Whereas the DualSense Edge actually has a bit of a user-friendly, this is your first Pro controller aspect of things, where it walks you through some of the options a little bit. You can get some light explanations for why you might want to use certain features or how you tune it. If Pro controllers are the thing that you aren't really used to using that much and you don't fully know how you want to make use of some of the features, the Edge does a great job of walking you through it. So that's a bunch of the features they have in common. What helps make each controller a little extra unique? Well, starting with the DualSense Edge, honestly, not a whole lot extra else. I've pretty much already covered all the main selling points, I think, of the Edge. One other nice thing about it I didn't really touch on too much is the fact that it does also come with a carrying case that fits everything for the controller, including having a slot for a stick module if you go out of your way to buy an additional one, and has a little accessible port area where you can open it up and plug the controller in to charge it while it's sitting in the carrying case. As for the Scuf Reflex, this is another one where I've already touched on most of its selling points, but I think a really important thing to emphasize about this controller is just how the process of ordering it is actually different from all the others. The Scuf Reflex does offer the option of doing a custom made to order one, so you can choose which features you want, which ones you don't want. You can choose to get a carrying case, you can choose to save money and not get a carrying case, and by far it offers the most color and aesthetic choices out of any controller. So if you're really interested in having a controller that feels like it is customized specifically to your tastes, both control-wise and looks-wise, that is something the Reflex offers that none of the others do, though it's also worth noting that by far out of the group, it also is the most expensive. If you don't take advantage of most of its customization options, it is competitively priced with the rest of them. If you go a little more all out on choosing different color options and taking advantage of all the different options like the instant click triggers, that total price tag quickly adds up to being the highest out of the full set. Meanwhile, at the opposite end of that spectrum is the Victrix Pro BFG, which instead of being made to order, just gives you a ton of options all right away when you purchase it, and does it at the lowest price point out of all these controllers. Still expensive, but it is the cheapest out of this set of four. It gives you options like being able to swap around the left-hand module of it, so you can have either symmetrical or offset sticks depending on your preference. The right module of the controller can be swapped out entirely to either be a traditional 4-button setup with a stick or a 6-button clicky setup used for fighting games. It's got 3 different D-pads to choose from, 2 of which are more traditional with a cross shape and rounded shape, and another one that is a plate shape that specifically comes with the controller that personally I actually don't like as much, but still the other 2 are awesome. There's just a lot of things that this controller can swap between and adapt to depending on what kind of games you're playing, so you can really configure it to be focused on something like a fighting game or a shooter and swap back and forth between those forms whenever you want, because everything is stored safely away in the carrying case that is provided with the controller as well. I will say that it doesn't always have the absolute best options out of some of these other controllers. For instance, the buttons in the 4-button setup don't feel like anything particularly special. The 6-button setup, while being awesome for fighting games, isn't really shaped exactly the same way that a lot of other fighting pads are, so it can take a little getting used to. But as far as something that just offers a great degree of customization and at the most aggressive price point out of all the controllers on here, I definitely think it has a very strong argument for offering a lot of value. Then there's the Wolverine V2 Pro, where I think the biggest word I can really use for pushing what makes his controller special: clicky. There is so much clicky feedback everywhere on this controller. I already mentioned that the triggers have the ability to swap into a clicky button mode instead of a full pull trigger. But all 4 of these symbol buttons are mecha tactile buttons, which Razer has used on their past Pro controllers, which is something that I personally really love the feeling of. The shoulder buttons have a clicky feeling to them, and even the D-pad has a clicky register for the 8 different directions, which is something that I personally really love for fighting games and getting a very clear sense and feeling of which directions I'm pressing when. It's worth noting that while it doesn't have the full list of colors that the Scuff Reflex has, it does have more colors than the Victrix and the DualSense Edge by coming in both a white and black model. Because it is a Razer controller, of course, lighting is also a heavy focus of this, so you can have different RGB options going on for the design of it if you like having certain colors pop a little more on it. I think it's also worth pointing out, noting that of all these controllers, the tension on the sticks for the Wolverine V2 Pro are also actually the loosest. There's a certain fluidity and speed of motion to them that I don't feel in the other controllers that, to be honest, personally, I actually don't like quite as much. I like having a little bit of tension and snap back to my sticks. The Wolverine doesn't offer, but if you like the feeling of that kind of lower tension, faster movement, then that is something to be aware of. One pet peeve I do have about the Wolverine is that out of all the controllers on this list, it is the only one that does not have a carrying case option at all in any form. It does not ship with one. You cannot purchase one separately. And as someone who is very good at losing small parts, it having 2 swappable stick heads and a dongle for connecting wirelessly to the system, I really wish there was a place to store those like a carrying case. Especially since out of all these controllers, it is the most expensive one as far as base price goes, although like I mentioned earlier, the Scuff Reflex can easily get even higher depending on what add-ons you purchase. Ultimately, each of these controllers has a very different approach to what it means to be a Pro controller, and I think depending on your personal needs, some fit better than others. Like I mentioned at the top end of the video, there's that camp of controllers that still maintain a lot of traditional DualSense features. I think ones especially worth noting are things like the haptics and the gyro controls, because gyro is becoming more popular in a lot of first-person view games. As far as those controllers go, I think the DualSense Edge is an excellent entry point option because of the fact that its first-party integrated software is just better than all the other options out there by virtue of the fact that it is first party and is right there on the PS5 for you to use. The Scuff Reflex, while it can be very expensive, I think it does offer a lot of quality in terms of the buttons and options that it has. And if you don't mind throwing down a lot and you want a controller that not only has features that you like, but also has a customizable look, that's really the only one on this list that's going to offer that. The Victrix BFG Pro, I think, is a very aggressive value-focused Pro controller with a lot of customization tools baked right in with a carrying case that keeps it all nice together. And the Razer Wolverine V2 Pro is a controller that is less focused on customization outside of the fact that it does have the most remappable buttons with 4 in the back and 2 in the center, but is instead focused a lot more on build quality and some higher quality parts with things like the very heavy focus on tactile clicky feedback basically everywhere that it can fit it. Honestly, at the end of the day, I don't think any of these controllers is a bad choice. They all have their own individual strengths, weaknesses, and their unique benefits of what they have to offer. I think the DualSense Edge is a really nice, safe choice for a lot of people. I will say that for me personally, if I just had to pick one of these to keep and hold on to, it would probably be the Razer Wolverine V2 Pro, primarily because of the fact that while I do like keeping and maintaining a lot of DualSense features for other games, I can just use a regular DualSense for that, and the Wolverine V2 Pro is offering me some specific features that I just really like using, particularly that mecha tactile feedback on the symbol buttons and D-pad. So those are my thoughts on all 4 of these PS5 Pro controllers. If you're interested in learning more about any of them or grabbing one of them, I do have links posted down below in the description. As always, if you enjoyed this video, hit that thumbs up button to let me know, subscribe if you haven't yet, and I will see you guys later.